The document is largely made up of charges against King George III, accusing him of a long train of abuses and a history of repeated injuries and usurpations over an extended period of time. Independence could be justified only if the charges against the king were convincing and of sufficient gravity to warrant dissolution of his authority over the American people. There are 29 charges against King George III, listed point after point, and arranged in ever-increasing seriousness, from indignities to downright tyranny.
By 1776, it was clear you could only end the reign of a living king for one of two reasons. The first I find particularly charming, that the king was a rex inutilis, a useless king, or in other words, inept. If he's inept, you could get rid of him. And the other reason was that the king was evil. And evil had a particular implication, that is, that he had interfered with the rights and freedoms of the people. What the Americans said in 1776 is, we have the evil kind, and that's why we're getting rid of him. That was important. It's important, and I think it helps to explain why the Americans and some other countries which have grown out of the British tradition have constitutional crises rather than coup d'etat. It is an important precedent for political stability.
Here are some of the charges. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary to the public good. He has forbidden his government to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance.
Well, what I suppose is peculiar about the Declaration of Independence compared to rather similar documents that were issued by states and towns and counties is that it has such a long list of grievances. And they open with some that were very difficult to identify, particularly for people abroad, because they're stated in very general terms, and often they referred to events that were played out on the local level and were not common to all of the colonies.
He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people.
The opening paragraph, of course, begins not whereas, but when in the course of human events. And then instead of saying bye, bye, bye when he got to the grievances, he made it more emphatic. He has, he has, he has.
He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures.
This probably referred to the royal governor's convening of the Massachusetts legislature in Cambridge, and loyalists like Thomas Jefferson were very quick to point out that Cambridge wasn't really all that far from Boston. It was not uncomfortable. They generally convened at Harvard College, and the legislatures could stay in the homes of professors, which were not uncomfortable. So it seemed a rather cooked-up provision.
The next group of charges, however, could not be described as trivial or insignificant. He has combined with others, meaning the British Parliament, to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our constitutions and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us of the benefits of trial by jury, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever.
I think few people today would say that George III was a tyrant. We understand his motivation rather differently. I think the reason the Declaration attacks the king should be understood within a British constitutional context. The rule in Britain was the king can do no harm. The king was symbolic of the state and the ultimate authority of the state. In ordinary politics, people forbore attacking the king. They always said his minister was responsible for any policy, even if they thought the king was personally responsible for that policy. The only time that you could publicly attack the king was when you thought the depredations had gone so far, the grievances had gone so far, that the state had yielded its legitimacy. In other words, to attack the king was to announce revolution.
In the third and concluding group of charges against the king, Jefferson cites the most recent and most serious offenses against the American people. He has abdicated government here, withdrawing his governors and declaring us out of his allegiance and protection. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is, at this time, transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny. He has incited treasonable insurrections of our fellow citizens with the allurements of forfeiture and confiscation of property. He has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. This piratical warfare, the opprobrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian king of Great Britain.
People are always struck by Jefferson's long, final grievance against the king, and often it's misunderstood. It is taken to be an attack on the slave system, which it was not. It blamed the king for the slave trade, and it was written in such a way that it sounded as if the king had somehow personally piloted the ships to Africa, slashed the whip to get the slaves on board, piloted it west, sold the slaves, as if the king personally had carried on the slave trade, which of course was patently untrue. And I think that's one reason why the Congress eliminated the provision. But why was Jefferson so angry about this? What really prompted his anger was the fact that the king had vetoed efforts on the part of the Virginia legislature to tax the importation of slaves.